With more on the crisis in Egypt, I'm joined by Michael Shank. He's a senior policy advisor for American Democratic Congressman Michael Honda. He's also worked as a Mideast policy advisor to several global agencies. Thanks very much for joining us, Michael. And let's discuss American policy in relation to Egypt. Hillary Clinton has called for real democracy in Egypt. What do you think the White House is pushing for or hoping for in Cairo?
Jennifer, I think the real lesson here is that democracy in Egypt can't be born on the back of U.S. military aid. Since 1975, the U.S. has funneled roughly $50 billion in military, primarily military aid to Egypt, focusing very little on social, economic, political reforms. If we cared about social economic reforms, we'd address the 60% illiteracy, the 40% poverty rate, the 25% unemployment. If we cared about political reforms in Egypt, we'd focus on the Constitution, which bans political parties from participating. We'd focus on the parliament, 95% of which is rigged. We'd focus on emergency law and emergency rule, which Mubarak has used for much of his two-decade regime. And we'd focus on elections which are considered by many fraudulent, boycotted by most opposition parties in November, December of last year, boycotted by many opposition parties. So if we truly cared about democratic reform in Egypt, we'd focus on social, economic, political reform. We haven't invested in that in the past. This is akin to much of U.S. foreign policy throughout the Muslim world. In Pakistan, we're seeing the same thing.
Lawrence Cannon, our foreign affairs minister, saying that it's not up to foreign governments to get involved. Do you think that that's sort of being echoed throughout the international community?
I think that's right. Certainly people in Egypt are saying that. I mean, it's a little late for that. If you look at the protesters, they're reporting back that they're finding munitions that say made in the USA. So our military aid is being felt on the ground by the protesters. In terms of involvement in picking the next president or encouraging Vice President Suleiman to step up or Mohammed al-Baradei to take the throne, I think we need to lay off there. In terms of next steps, the Constitution probably needs to be discarded, rewrit. Certainly the parliament needs to be disbanded, 95% of which I said before is rigged or considered rigged. In terms of next steps, all opposition parties, religious or secular, need to be at the table discussing the future of Egypt. This is not an international community's decision. Certainly we can support it. Arab League, African Union, United States, UN needs to support it, but it definitely needs to be Egypt-led.
Egypt and the U.S. are strong allies. Who do you think, what side do you think Washington is on? Are they looking for a stable Egypt, or are they more interested in a democratic Egypt?
Well, if we look at the past, and certainly the military aid, the $50 billion military aid since 1975 shows that we're interested in a stable Egypt, not a democratic Egypt. I mean, we did have the Middle East Partnership Initiative, which invested a little bit in social, economic, political reforms, but not much. We care about Egypt because it's the Suez Canal. There's a lot of transportation, security that we're worried about. We care about Egypt in terms of its role as arbiter in the Middle East peace process. So in the past, we've cared about stability. We haven't really cared about democratic reform. And again, this is U.S. policy throughout the Muslim world. The investments are primarily military, not social, economic, political. However, the Egypt populace is saying you have to care about democracy. So I think U.S. is going to have to face this rub, step up, and care both about stability and democracy.
Michael, finally, how much concern should there be about a worst-case scenario with a civil war or an Islamist revolution?
Well, I don't think you're going to see an Islamist revolution. Muslim Brotherhood has participated in the past and has been in the parliament in the past, 1/5 of the elected seats, Muslim Brotherhood. They've played by the rules. I think they're going to play by the rules. They've kept a back seat to the protests, I think smartly, because they don't want to be seen as participating in some kind of Islamist revolution. I don't think you're going to see full-scale civil war. I think protesters are merely saying, we're going to be on these streets until Mubarak is removed. And I think statements from Secretary Clinton and President Obama in terms of democratic reform need to trickle down into real, tangible social, economic, political reform processes that we support.
Michael Shank, great to talk to you today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Well, it is back to work in Ottawa today as members of Parliament return from